Welcome. This is the Free Market Roadshow, probably the largest annual series of public conferences on economics. Remarkable experts are discussing the challenges and providing libertarian solutions to today's problems. Organized by the Austrian Economic Center in cooperation with select institutes, universities and think tanks, the Free Market Roadshow tours all over Europe. Today we pay a visit to Blagoevgrad.
Hello, my name is Robert White. I am the Dean of Faculty and Interim Provost at the American University in Bulgaria. AUBG was founded in September 1991 following the fall of communism with the mission of preparing students for life in a democratic society. AUBG has been a proud partner of the Free Market Roadshow for the last 4 years. Over this time, our students have debated free market ideas with prominent international thinkers. We are grateful to the Austrian Economic Center, Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, and the Free Market Roadshow's other sponsors for helping us to bring these speakers to campus. We are disappointed that we cannot have an event on campus this year. However, we are happy that the Free Market Roadshow is continuing as a virtual event. Over the past year, governments worldwide have imposed controls on their citizens that in some countries is unprecedented. Our university has been prevented by law from holding on-ground classes, despite introducing policies that protect faculty, staff, and students effectively. The Free Market Roadshow creates a forum in which students and intellectuals can question and debate the legitimacy of government policies. We're happy to be partnering with the Free Market Roadshow for a 5th year. We're looking forward to another stimulating event.
Hello, we're live, although we're only online, with today's Free Market Roadshow from Blagoevgrad, say from Bulgaria, and the American University in Bulgaria here. Today's topic will be democracy and civil rights in danger. We have just heard Dean White speaking of the mission of the American University in Bulgaria, which is to prepare our students as leaders of democratic societies, tackling all of the challenges that democracy and the exercise of political freedom and civil rights go along with. And now, 30 plus years after the collapse of communism and the powerful wind of change we have felt for all those years that brought to us a lot of hopes, but we have to be honest and humble, a lot of disappointments as well. So now we can question if that democracy we have dreamt of and we have cherished, if it has answered all of our hopes, and if it has brought all of its promises to life. And is the exercise of our civil rights we understand as fundamental, and as progress goes, we enhance and we say develop those civil rights, aren't they to some extent the worm within the fruit which will put in danger the very exercise of democracy and its existence? We are pleased to have a keynote speech by Daniel Kaddik to introduce today's topic. Daniel needs no presentation. He is the executive director of the European Liberal Forum. That's a think tank based in Brussels, which promotes the liberal and democratic movements across the continent. And he's also a very keen friend, a close friend to Southeast Europe. He has been for many years the region director of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. So his speech will precisely launch our discussion today on democracy and civil rights in danger. Daniel.
We live in the worst time ever. Many millennials are worse off than their parents at the same age, and children will not attain the same level of prosperity as their parents. We will all lose our jobs to machines, inequality and poverty are on the rise, and of course, globalization, deregulation and financial capitalism and anti-social politics are to blame. But this is a snapshot of social debate in many countries, especially rich ones. Analyses like these give rise to calls for more social welfare, redistribution and intervention. Social justice is the rallying cry, which has the more or less charming attribute that it can mean everything and nothing at once, that it can be loaded with all possible content to appear most fluffy. It serves as a semantic antithesis to neoliberalism if you question the sense of validity of even the most outrageous suggestions under the social justice label. Be prepared to be branded as antisocial. The most popular measurement in society seems to be wealth distribution and highlighting poverty. Well, kind of. As countries like Germany, pre-corona, but after a massive influx of asylum seekers, still had hard numbers to back up progress. Taking the classic definition of poverty, material hardship, the Federal Statistical Office announced in 2018 that it fell to a low of 3.1%, a trend that we have seen worldwide. But no solution without inventing a new problem. Especially in Western countries, poverty is no longer the yardstick, having been replaced by poverty risk. Those who have to live with less than 60% of the median income are already affected. Those of us who have read past the headlines or had to suffer through statistic lectures can spot the problem. Even if we all became millionaires overnight, those 60% would still be relatively poor. The suggested solution is distribution via welfare, which leaves us with another problem connected to justice and its debate. Welfare is increasingly constructed as a right that individuals hold over society that can be used against the state or to ask for a certain degree of protection, for benefits or for services. These rights are varied. Right to work, right to an adequate standard of living, to health or to housing, to education. They can now be found in most legal instruments governing fundamental rights. In Europe and globally, for instance, the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. This may seem natural to us. Who doesn't think that everyone should have access to healthcare, to education, be provided food and have a roof above one's head? However, the reality is that these rights represent a major departure from fundamental rights as they were originally constructed by the Enlightenment philosophers. These second-generation rights must be distinguished from first-generation, civil and political rights, which are very closely linked to the liberal tradition. These are the rights found within the British Bill of Rights of 1689 and the French Declaration of Human Rights and Citizenship of 1789. Among them, freedom of thought and speech, of association, protection against undue restraint, right to property, and above all, right to liberty. The main difference between first and second generation rights, which explains why the latter have never been central in liberal thinking, is that while the first only requires abstention from others and from the state, the second requires positive action and, more problematic, the potential infringement of the first. To say that you have the right to food and shelter means that someone else has the duty to provide you with such food and shelter. Usually the state should step in, meaning at the end of the day another individual or all of us. There is hence an inherent clash between these rights. A right to welfare for one means breach of property rights or freedom for another. It is not to say that education, welfare, housing are not important for people's dignity, but that construing them as rights gives rise to more problems than it answers. The idea of welfare as a right is inherently linked to the idea of social justice. whose basic assumptions have been formidably criticized by Friedrich August von Hayek throughout his career and in his writing. The main flaw with the idea of social justice is that it sees society in its myriad of interactions as if it was unfolding according to a certain plan, was pursuing a certain objective, or followed a certain intention. This, of course, is a constructivist fallacy. Society has no plan. It is only the result of free action, coordinated mostly by voluntary exchange. Hence, it makes no sense to treat the result of these interactions as just or unjust, as you would do for human action. However, this is exactly what welfare as a right does. By claiming that individuals have a right to a certain division of the welfare that comes out of society, by claiming society at large has the inherent responsibility to take care of you, to protect you from social risk, that you need someone to take care of you because you clearly cannot. This is not to say that liberals cannot defend the welfare state, or at least a certain version of it. Nothing prevents us from saying that we have a moral duty to help at least the least well-off, that democratic deliberation can decide to finance a number of public goods. This is even more important from a liberal perspective that takes account of positive liberty as constructed by Isaiah Berlin. Not only the protection from interference, but also the capacity to lead one's life, to be autonomous, to make choices. If we want equality of opportunity, these opportunities have to be enabled, especially for those who still have all their life ahead of them. It is just important to stress inside the liberal family and against our opponents that liberalism is not or should not be ignorant of hardship or basic socio-economic needs. This is also the case from a more utilitarian perspective of welfare maximization. In order to function, societies need people who feel secure and are in good health. In order to unlock equality of opportunity, they need to be educated. This is even more true in today's knowledge economy. We have an interest in evolutionary social cohesion based on opportunity, as it makes societies more stable. Unfortunately, the debate on social justice rarely goes beyond the banal demand for redistribution from top to bottom. It is not talking about unlocking human potential. It is about equalizing and having the semantics right to justify the work of the welfare industry and the political narrative of social intervention. This again uncovers fundamental different understandings of people and society between socialists and liberals, between paternalistic proponents of a nanny state and those who believe in the potential of people. While the armchair socialists of old were sitting in coffee houses dreaming of liberating the working class from capitalist ownership, the new Twitter socialists are dreaming of liberating the working class from work altogether. Take the example of the proposal for universal basic income. The UBI flows directly from the idea of welfare as a right, the idea that we hold a right on society to provide us with an income regardless of our contribution to this society. This makes conceptually little sense because the wealth of any society only comes from the contributions made by its individuals. If some have a right to the sum of money without any counterpart, this means that some have the duty to work for others. This is a strange vision of the equal dignity of humans. It is dangerous for society. Rather than seeing each other as humans equal in dignity, we start seeing each other as providers and beneficiaries. This is not to say that no safety net should exist, but that it should simply be a safety net, something temporary to help those who have fallen and alleviates the fear of losing one's livelihood overnight. One may say, what does it change? And one might reply, it's not only a matter of principle. It is important not to create the attitude of entitlement and benefits and protection. There is no shame in requiring the help of society, but there is no pride either. Without proper incentives to work, these kinds of schemes result in solidifying unemployment. Not in the most productive brackets of society, but in those who are indeed most vulnerable. A system like this would tip the utility of recipients towards staying at home over having a job that creates additional stress. This makes the recipient fully dependent on the state for their livelihood. Worse than that, it has the potential to also solidify a precarious class and thereby stifling social cohesion. Instead of creating opportunities for families and children, it makes them reliant on the carer. The carer, the state, that primarily becomes the securer of second-generation rights. A social service provider, your nanny, The total requirement to fund such initiatives across the EU would be in the trillions of euros, and we must ask ourselves how this would be funded. While many would argue that tax increases are the way to go, it would be impossible to fully fund this program only this way, without significantly increased taxes across the board. It becomes a giant redistribution machine, again infringing on your first-generation rights. For the benefit of UBI, governments might be forced to cut other programs, including the most effective measure for social cohesion, education. Besides creating equality of opportunity as much as possible, welfare benefits should push those who receive them to go back to work. They should be generous but limited in time and conditioned to an active search for work in order to avoid situations of an inactivity trap. At the same time, one must be cautious to not develop a poor hunt where those entitled and in need of benefits can simply not access them due to the complexity of the procedures and are therefore penalized. Rather than inventing new complicated schemes, we should radically reform our welfare state and implement what had been very well argued for by Milton Friedman: a flat tax on all incomes combined with a negative income tax for those whose revenue falls short and under a certain threshold. This is the best way to ensure that work always pays more than inactivity, and to avoid putting the charge of financing the system on companies like it is the case with a minimum income. For liberals, it is crucial that we combine our belief in people with opportunity creation. We all benefit from a society where people are safe and feel secure for their livelihood. We all benefit from well-off societies where people, regardless of their social status, of their parents, their creed, their color, or their sex, feel that they have a better life ahead of them and that they can make it on their own merits. And nanny that tells them what they don't have, that they don't have to, that takes away all the risk, that makes them dependent, is a nanny that also is taking away the freedom to create and to challenge, which is the fundamental of progress.
The freedom to create and challenge as a fundamental of progress, indeed. This raises a lot of questions. We are pleased to discuss with three panelists today, and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce three absolutely amazing researchers, each one of them in their own field, with a very diverse background and a very diverse, say, cultural origin. We have people from France, from Cyprus, and from Bulgaria today. I'm so pleased to introduce to you Associate Professor Nur Köprülü from Near East University in Nicosia, Cyprus. She's a political scientist. For years, she has been working on the Middle East politics and cultural history. She's a keen observer of Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. And she has, of course, a very, very rich knowledge of the political and cultural reality in the Middle East and greater Eastern Mediterranean area. Our second panelist today would be Sylvain Trifilio from France. He's a special case which reminds me of what economists used to be 150 years ago, when they first had to study law, and then only they turned their attention to economics proper. This is, of course, the case of von Mises, Hayek, Aftalion, among others. So Sylvain is both a graduate in law and in economics. He's working at the Aix-Marseille University, where I myself had the pleasure to do my studies. And the third panelist today will be Boris Gurov from Bulgaria. He's a sociologist. So you see, we have a very diverse panel here from a scientific standpoint. He is a member of the Bulgarian Academy of Science and a fellow colleague of mine at the American University in Bulgaria, where he teaches political sciences and sociology, political sociology. He has been involved in observing and analyzing the most recent trends of this famous transition in the eastern part of Europe for the last 15 years. He has done some field work when it comes to election results and studies of social behavior in this part of the world. So I will turn now to Sylvain in the first place. If we can have him on the screen.
Hello. So what I would like to discuss is some reasons why welfare state can be a danger for democracy. It's not easy to figure out that welfare state can be a threat for democracy, as it's often presented as something coming together with. So I would like to discuss three reasons why welfare state can be a danger for democracy. The first reason is that the increase of welfare state makes the democratic control of government less effective. Welfare programs and interventions add to other political programs and interventions, and when the areas of state interventions multiply and inflate, it becomes impossible, or at least very difficult, for the people to control all of them through elections by the means of their votes. It's very difficult or impossible to know what voters vote for or against, and that's not a good sign. It may be a good thing for a journalist who can talk for hours about elections, but it's not a good thing for democracy. So the bigger the state is, the bigger welfare state is, the less effective democratic control. The wider state intervention is, the less effective democratic control. That's first reason. The second reason is that the development of welfare state participates to the increase of bureaucratic power. Offering welfare programs and services implies the employment of a large number of public agents, but all these civil servants and bureaucrats form a part of executive power which is not subject to democratic control. Public agents and bureaucrats are not elected; they are not removable, contrary to politicians. Hence, the expansion of welfare state increases the influence of bureaucratic power, and this bureaucratic power can get strong enough to neutralize democratic power and control, especially when reforms or retrenchment of the welfare system are at stake. And in the end, this leads to mistrust of public administrations, but more still of politicians and of political institutions who are supposed to head these administrations. So that's, I think, a second danger for democracy. The discuss comes from the fact that welfare state is based on a double premise that costs and risks can be avoided by government intervention. And of course, such a premise cannot be kept. In first place, welfare benefits and services are not free. There is always someone who pays. There's no such thing as a freelance, said Milton Friedman. And if you don't know or remember who pays, it may be because it's you. Politicians promise that others will pay, or others than you. But when a system such as the welfare state affects a whole population, it cannot be that the whole population does not participate and pay for it. So those who pay are actually very few. So welfare state has a cost, and even more, it can be awfully expensive and turn into a heavy burden for society and especially for the economy. Secondly, and finally, welfare services do not avoid risks. But what a welfare system does is that it distributes the costs of non-risks, but on the other side, it shows incapable of reacting efficiently to unknown risks. You can see what's currently happening with the COVID crisis. So generally speaking, the fact that this double promise cannot be kept is a source of frustration and mistrust to political power and representative institutions. And it pushes people into abstention or considering radical solutions for voting for extreme political parties. And that's a threat, can be a danger for democracy.
Thank you, Sylvain. So just to quickly summarize, less effective democratic control, the burden of democratic power, which brings, of course, mistrust towards politicians and public officials, and all of those false promises given to the public with this absolutely improbable transfer of costs across, of course, the nation. Now, this is quite a critique to say the Western democracies to the state in which they are currently, but they're still appealing. The Western democracy is still an image towards which many populations around the globe would think of and would lean towards, and they hope for such a development. Now I turn to Nur, and I would love to discuss and to hear from her what is the image of democracy and what is the image of civil rights in, let's say, East from Eden, so to speak, in the Middle East, and what is it now, 10 years after the promises of the Arab Spring? Did democracy manage to have a foot there? Did liberal ideas change the state of the world there? Is there any improvement? Can we speak of democratization of those societies, or is it just another false promise? Nur?
Thank you very much, there, Momtchil, and all the participants, and thank you very much for also this kind invitation. If I start from the end, I can definitely say that although we have witnessed with the art protests since 2011 onwards, I can say in 2021 that we have unfinished Arab Spring. So what I'm talking about, so when I say unfinished Arab Spring, if I may start with this argument, which is called convergence argument, I think it can be very instrumental in explaining why democracy is in danger, not just in Middle East, but it's something globe-wise, because we have not just authoritarian upgrading in Middle East and North Africa, but also have democracy downgrading elsewhere in the world. So I would like to also include the Western democracies at the same time, because of several reasons. One reason can be economically. The second reason can be, of course, the pandemic all around the world, that we have the democratic, backsliding. If I go back to Middle East and North Africa in general, I would like to state, first of all, that the region, even before the Arab Spring, already started to launch economic reforms. Basically, by mid-1970s onwards, we have witnessed with the liberal openings in the region, which is also called infitah in Arabic. But and then we also seen that like countries like Egypt signed contracts with International Monetary Fund and elsewhere. So, but when we come to the 2011 Arab uprisings, we can say that the people's demand for democracy is still alive, which also brought us the understanding that neoliberalism is actually did not automatically bring us a democratic Middle East. So I would like to challenge the very argument that liberalization of the markets facilitates the growth of democracy or democratization, because if there is a causal relationship, we cannot see this in Middle East. And recalling the keynote speech, that one of the main problems right now in the Middle East is the socio-economic disparities, and plus human security matter, which is actually a very important issue. The globalization and the spread of the free market economy towards Middle East countries did not actually precisely brought us well democratizations. Maybe selective economic reforms and selective political reforms not say that we achieve the ultimate goal of the democratization, if not democratic consolidation. And if I can also give an example from the House reports and the statistics, the records, it is still very difficult to state that there is an increase in the number of countries that can be regarded as free countries. And the only country in the post-Arab Spring era that achieved the rank of free is Tunisia. And Tunisia is seen like an exception actually in the region. So what I can say for the moment is neoliberalism and globalization of the free market economy did not bring democratization in the region. And if there is a relationship, this is continuous. And we can definitely argue that in the MENA region, I would like to also refer to Sylvain's point, because I think it is very, very crucial here. When we talk about welfare economies, this doesn't have to be closely associated with full democracies, because we also have in Middle East the Gulf country where there is a formula: no taxation without representation.
Thank you, Noor. This sounds like a blow and a disappointment, because when we take a look back at the history of the doctrine, of the ideology of liberalism, we cannot but recall that it all started with the Enlightenment in, of course, Scottish Enlightenment and French Enlightenment and their philosophies, with this fight against l'ancien régime, feudalism, which brought our say bourgeoisie revolutions, and based on industrialization, a new organization of economic activity and free markets, laissez-faire, laissez-passer, of course. So it was quite a positive change and quite a strong drive for a liberalization of markets and fundamental civil rights and freedoms. And we have experienced this 30 plus years ago now here in the eastern part of Europe. And I mentioned this wind of change with all the hopes it brought back 20 years ago, 30 years ago to the region. And we thought that the market forces, with their requirements for quality, for, well, based on competition, of course, will provide a fertile ground for proper political changes and the emergence of sound, strong, reliable social and, of course, political institutions. And I cannot but turn to Boris now and ask him for his critical assessment of what happened over the last 30 years here in Bulgaria and Eastern Europe in general. And did really market liberalization contribute to some extent, if ever, to providing those political institutions and structures we dreamt of? Or do we find ourselves in, say, a captured state reality where economic benefits, as Noor just mentioned, are directed towards some specific interests and hands? Boris?
Okay, thank you, Momtchil. It's a hard question to try to answer in a couple of minutes, but let's say that 30 years ago in political science and between economists, there was some form of at least general consensus that if, let's say, the economics of the Washington Consensus is used in Eastern Europe, it would provide a very sound ground for democratization. And basically, if you start via shock therapy or privatization, if you start the economical process and you enforce property rights, you will have, probably in some ulterior moment, but you will have fruitful ground for the democratic process to start. And if you look at the countries of Eastern Europe after 30 years of transition, my personal opinion is that this did not happen really. So if I go back to Daniel Kaddik's speech, he insisted very much on the importance of cohesion for societies as some form of alternative to, let's say, welfare state politics. What you're witnessing in Eastern Europe and particularly in Bulgaria is the fact that citizens do not trust political parties. More than 90% of Bulgarians do not trust political parties to promote some kind of agenda. They do not trust the NGO sector. More than 75% of Bulgarians declare that they do not have trust that the NGO sector represents or potentially could represent their interest. And even they do not trust spontaneous forms of civil collective action. More than half declare that there is no possibility for such organizations to represent their interest. And there was a project on trying to understand the problems between citizens and administration, what nowadays Bulgarian want, and especially economically active Bulgarians who are more informed than the others, they imagine some form of completely individual consulting from the state, a questionnaire which goes directly to, let's say, to the state. And just, I would like to finish because Bulgaria was a 10%, it was again mentioned in the keynote, a 10% minimalistic flat rate state, and it still is nominally. But I just looked through the Euro funds that Bulgaria received during from becoming a EU member. So 2007, 2021, 25 billion euros. And for the next 6 years, 2021, 2027, 24 billion euros. And I would like to say that if we go on the next level, not just welfare to the citizens, but some form to businesses in Bulgaria, I have some preoccupation about the capacity of the Bulgarian state to properly allocate those funds because they're not project-based. It's basically direct funding in investing. So I do think that there is a huge risk that when those funds are disbursed by the states, that there would be a lot of populistic welfare state funding as well.
Thank you. So quite a grim picture from all three of you. I hope for a bit more of an optimism here, but perhaps it is the right time to question if the ground of democracy, if the drive of the liberal ideology is as vivid and lively as we hope or we thought it is, and perhaps we shall question our understanding that our civil rights, our fundamental rights, are as secure as we thought they were. So we have on one side a welfare state which is, so to speak, sinking into under its own weight and becoming more and more incapacitated into providing what it promises to do. On the other hand, in the eastern part of Europe, we have states which basically live on the transfer of wealth from west towards the east. That's specifically the case in Bulgaria. And finally, as we move further east, the the market liberalization does not bring all the changes that the populations there may hope for. Now, there is a question for Nur. And we know that Middle East countries will score very low in all economic freedom indexes. Is there a good reason not to consider those countries as free markets? Precisely because states and the state apparatuses in each and every country gives opportunities to select few to execute such free market operations and enrich themselves through. Would it be wrong to say that market liberalization is a privilege, so to speak, for only few people close to the state, close to the authorities?
Mm-hmm. Well, if we also take the example of Lebanon, which is one of the first countries in the region that opened, its doors for international investments and etc., we can also see that actually this country is now at the edge margin of collapsing state for several reasons. Not, of course, just because of neoliberal economies. We need to mention that, but some other reasons as well. But when I consider, for instance, the economic reforms which has been launched, like in Egypt, in Jordan, basically, the privatization policies or the liberalization policies in the form of privatization and the other measures, you can see that the regimes or the incumbents, they can use a type of selective economic reforms to find out a new mechanism for cooptation or containing the opposition. So, actually, the economy is really becoming scarce in this region. And those sources for creating patronage relations is now a little bit limited. So the new way of dealing with economic problems and also the question of legitimacy, we can say that we have different hybrid regimes actually in the region, from authoritarian to democratic hybridity, and each have already found certain mechanisms to sustain their authoritarian rules or hybrid regimes, and creating a new chronic capitalist class or producing a new crony bourgeoisie classes actually created a kind of a symbiotic relationship between the state and the economic elites. But now what I can see as a main threat basically to the incumbent regimes is this unfinished protests, because we started to also see new wave, we can say second Arab uprisings, or the second wave of Arab uprisings, which started by 2018 in Jordan, later on Kuwait, Iraq, and Lebanon in 2019. So it seems like that this base will not be easily co-opted.
Okay, so it rings a bell here, because it's quite a familiar situation here in Eastern Europe, and not to mention Russia and Turkey, which from being an exception 15-20 years ago in the, say, Muslim world of a functioning democracy, turned into something which is a bit less of a functioning democracy nowadays. But this all brings down to the question of, after all, who can we trust to protect our individual rights? And if not the government, then whom? I'm sure Sylvain will be very much interested in sharing some ideas on is there a way to protect those and enforce those individual rights in a universal manner, and to have to bring less risks in the system when it comes to protection of individual rights? Would there be any alternative structures for protection of individual rights? After all, Hayek once famously said that economists shall not try to explain what the world is, but imagine what the world could be, if, of course, my quotation is correct. Whom do we have to trust with the protection of our individual rights if governments cannot be trusted? I mean, can we can we have? I mean, is there a salvation? What would you think? No, you wouldn't think anything at all. Good. So we're doomed then. Okay. That's I'm afraid a very, very sad situation if it's only the governments we can trust for. Because this brings another question then. How will political change happen if there is no way to rely on governments? And we have seen it in Bulgaria. For those who know, over the last months, there have been some protests in Bulgaria against the government, started last summer. And questions are now, is democracy functioning, or do we need to go through another moment of violence as we observe such a moment in the Middle East? How do we protect our civil rights, Boris?
Well, because you took the Bulgarian elections, there are a lot of colleagues who see the materialization of some protest vote. I do see a personalistic populist party first, and a personalistic party which doesn't say much, but probably will be populistic second. So, in my opinion, okay, there's an effort for parts of Bulgarian citizens to group and defend their rights. For the time being, they're unsuccessful. And the problem is that even in the Western countries, I would say that there is this trend to populism and personalistic politics. You have Donald Trump, you have Macron in France, if you like. You have an isolated figure who just gathers protest votes. And for the time being, you have Brexit where you have populism. There's no figure, but it's the same mechanism. And it's about gathering those votes. For the time being, I do not see real political or social movements who represent some form of alternative to those forms of politics. Classical parties are not well. They're losing members, they're losing support. They're short of ideas, and they're not performing well even in Western Europe. So it was something that probably started here, but was very fast exported in Western Europe. So for the time being, and I told you the data on Bulgaria, Bulgarians do not believe in associating themselves. So it's a very hard question. I do not see again an optimistic answer for that.
So you say the protection of our civil rights relies on each and every election cycle looking for, say, the white knight coming on his white horse to save us from those we have elected through a democratic process, of course, during the previous election cycle. And each and every time we have to push somebody and install them in an executive power in order to look and to secure, to some extent, of course, the protection of our fundamental rights. Isn't then democracy undermining liberties? Because that's a paradox, but we have to take it into account. We live. We have mentioned the COVID-19 crisis. We are giving up freedoms and liberties. to the imperious reason to protect lives, of course, but isn't this democratic rule of the majority, say, undermining our individual rights, our liberties, and how do we cope with this? Who would go for this? It's all question is all for all three of you. Who would venture to put his head in the bag? Nur, you're the political scientist here.
Okay then. Well, if this is something that the whole world is facing, well, what I can see that most of the time, political science and international relations, we say that we are always waiting for a counter-hegemonic force. So I think this can be only achieved not just with local politics, but trying to, I think, mobilize certain, in certain areas we need to mobilize. And what I can see, at least from the region, my regional perspective, that for instance, why the Tunisians, they saved their lives, in terms of going towards the transition, as I said, if not democratic consolidation, they wanted it. They had the will to do that. And of course, they are not at the center of the geopolitics of the region. And I think this is also very important. But also, they really put their will on their agenda. And they also rewarded with the Nobel Peace Prize because of the consensus, the compromise that have been found between the seculars and the Islamists. So if we take into consideration this political will, I think this is what we need, recalling Jean-Jacques Rousseau, maybe it's just at the time. So, well, I think what we need is a new social contracts. And these new social contracts should be written together. And then, well, I think even in our daily lives, we need to raise these type of discussions. And mobilization, I guess, is very, very important, not just at the local level, at certain regional levels, and maybe, if it is possible, at the global level.
Okay, so would that be a solution to bringing democracy where it is most needed, say the Middle East and North Africa region, if economic liberalism cannot?
Well, maybe this needs to be also a question that we need to readdress, because most of the time, following the modernist, argument that if there is an economic liberalization, this will automatically bring us democratization. This seems like that there is no such kind of a transitology. So I think this needs a new perspective at the same time. So if it maybe it worked in Western part of the Europe, but it seems like that it's not working worldwide. So that transitology, I think, might be misleading, especially with the 2008 financial crisis, because now we don't have laissez-faire at all. I'm not an economist. I'm so sorry, Sylvain, and Momtchil, if I'm also interfering, but we are also in the era of interventionist liberalism. So I think movement loses its significance when we think about in a way, liberalization.
Okay, Sylvain, can liberalism survive this? Can we
Survival.
Can we cope with? I mean, can liberalism as an ideology, as this kernel of ideas, so fertile ideas for the last 250 plus years, which has definitely contributed to the improvement of our civilization, I may say, and I do dare say so. Can liberalism as an ideology, despite all the challenges and despite all the shortcomings we see in the greater European Mediterranean region and elsewhere, can it still be a reliable foundation for the evolution of our civilization?
Oh, why not? On a historical ground, you can see that it survived a huge crisis in the 20th century. And to come back to what was said about economic liberalization as something coming before democracy, it worked in the West. It also worked in Asia. If you look at South Korea, Taiwan, or these countries, they liberalized before becoming democracies. That was the idea of Milton Friedman, that economic freedom comes before and democracy comes after the economic freedom. And he was the advisor of the governments of Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, and these countries followed this path, well, these patterns as some Western countries did. And well, liberalism is not only an ideology. It's some intellectuals, some classical liberals insisted on the fact that it's before being an ideology, it's something that comes from experience, and it's a way of thinking and a way of acting that insists on the experience and the fact that you can take the best from what is experienced individually or collectively.
Oh, thank you. Now I'll turn to Boris, and it will be quite a personal observation slash question. Both you and I, we have done our studies in France. We have done our studies in the US. We have traveled for many years abroad, lived abroad for many years. Now both of us, we're back in Bulgaria. As Sylvain said, this personal experience of liberty, of freedom, of ideas which we may have not discussed in the same way here in Bulgaria, and we contributed to bringing them here in Sofia, the AUBG, the Greater Eastern Europe region, and many others did so. Can we import it? Can we import democracy and liberalism? And have we experienced it, or will we experience it one day? I mean, will it happen?
Look, it's very hard to if you take the perspective, do we bring as ideas things to Bulgaria? I'm completely sure the answer is yes. If this is the direction that Bulgaria is gonna take, and if even those are the ideas that are gonna count in the future years, I don't know. That's for sure. I mean, doing this course in AUBG on the Bulgarian transition, of course, let's say the Washington Consensus and Milton Friedman's ideas, Bulgaria went completely bankrupt in '97. It was a state-owned economy. It was a complete chaos. Basically, in 4 years, it started a normal economic life and started democratic process. But somewhere along the way, and this is my bottom line, democracy is not byproduct of the economy. This is what is for sure. And everything you can see as research on the current problem is that people do not believe in democracy. It is not that they lack ideas or they are. Of course, some of them are uneducated, but they do not believe in the idea of the possibility of impacting government. The most Bulgarians see impacting government is on the local level, in their neighborhood of the local level. That's the tops that they imagine that they can achieve something. And this is the current problem. I think you know of Eastern Europe. And this is the problem that we need to address as people who, if I took your example, as people who come from Western universities and Western ideas. This is our challenge to find a solution to that, because this is something which will it gives me the idea that perpetually we're gonna change political figures in the same setting, which is not an optimal solution for sure.
Okay, so that brings perhaps to one of the last questions you have time for. If collective action is challenged, if democracy is to be pitted against individual rights, what do we think about the opting out right as the most essential individual right to step out of a political arrangement which does not suit us? In a way, to bring it back to Hirschman's understanding of voice, loyalty, and exit, where do we stand? Is opting out right a right, and is it the most essential one? Because this is, I believe, the last question we'll have time for. Would anybody venture to go into this discussion? No? Or shall we leave it?
In my opinion, and I'll be very quick, it should be a right, because of course, people who opt for the exit option, it's not going to change their fate. They're going to be subject of, let's say, political spoliation. They're going to be abused by the elites, but it's a choice, part of freedom. In Bulgaria, you have most of the people who go for the voice option, but basically this is the market for future politicians. And I do hope that there's going to be some meaningful, let's say, professionally motivated or socially motivated to have cohesion. I mean, in the keynote, we have 4 times the term cohesion. And those societies, in my opinion, need some form of cohesion in groups to start making impact on the democratical level to protect their rights.
Nur, you have any thoughts?
And it seems like that this awareness is still not eroded, and maybe that is the hope behind. Maybe I mentioned something disappointing, or we are referring to. It seems like that we can see it as pessimistic, but the optimism is still there is this awareness for their rights. If I can also give reference World Values Survey, in accordance with the 2020 records, still, for instance, at least the majority of them, if I may also give reference to Jordan, Lebanon, Tunisia, reports in these countries, that they are not satisfied with their governments, and they are mentioning that they are, I mean, the best way of governance is democracy. At least we have high percentages for this. And regarding the essential characteristics of democracy, civil and political rights, and plus socio-economic rights actually comes at the top. So this gives us actually the hope that people have this awareness, and that's the reason that also the chance to finalize what I would like to say when I said we have unfinished Arab Spring, because still the demands and the opt for rights is out there, is still out there.
Thank you. I guess we have an unfinished Arab Spring not only in the Middle East but elsewhere as well, be it the eastern part of Europe or even France and elsewhere. We have seen some protests over the last few years in France relative to the way politics and policies are made. I want to thank you, all 3 of you, for this discussion. A main takeaway, of course, would be that let's take Churchill again. The worst possible political arrangement, except all the others. And as imperfect as it is, it still provides some room enough for us to have those critical discussions, this capacity to challenge ideas more or less peacefully and harmoniously, and to, if not have progress, at least avoid the regress, which I'm afraid we have very, very often failed to realize and to observe. That brings me to our closing words here, and I will take the opportunity to tell the audience that there will be very soon and yet another Free Market Roadshow event in less than 2 days. That will be in Tallinn on the Baltic coast, and it will focus on the consequences of regulations. What did we forgot since 1991, when all the economic and political changes started to unfold in this greater Eastern Europe area? And what did we overlooked when we hoped that the market liberalization would very, very quickly provide for the needed democratic and political changes as well. Thank you, Nur. Thank you very much. Thank you, Boris. Thank you, Sylvain. Thank you again, the Free Market Roadshow and the Austrian Economics Center, for this opportunity to present the ideas of liberty here at the AUBG virtual campus. Of course, to everybody, very, very pleasant evening, and thank you once again for this discussion. Goodbye.